There was a time in my life when I listened to music. Then it ended. After that, any music I encountered was more or less garbage. As decades pass, I've become a grouch about it. New music actually angers me. It literally puts me in a sour mood. Maybe it's because at age 45, you enter that phase in life when pop culture no longer pertains to you. That zeitgeist of film and music, it no longer produces things considering you its target audience. Yep, the arts have moved on, and whatever you think about it just isn't relevant. It's sort of like alcohol. You see a bottle of Crown Royal in your pantry and think about having a glass, remembering fondly the way it used to make you awesome. Instead, it just puts you to sleep. Music once mattered a lot. As a kid, it probably ranked number 3 or 4 in my priority list, somewhere behind girls or sports or maybe clothes when I lost the baby fat. Music mattered for young people the way grown-ups got riled about politics. It's an expression of identity. It makes you shout from the hilltops and scream down the hallways. Nothing feels better than driving your vehicle, elbows out the window, Kenwood speakers rocking out to precisely the right tune, like Bernie Casey's John Slade from I'm Gonna Get You Sucka so aptly declared, "That's my theme music. Every good hero should have some." Music for me began in 8th grade, peaking at the end of high school before its gradual decline. My audio journey spanned from record scratch and urban beats to the chaotic noise of guitar distortion and speaker hiss in a time that preceded the music video's demise. It was an era when concert flyers could be found stapled to telephone poles, and record stores ran with the critical depth of a modern library. Good music was scarce and consequently valuable. You couldn't just stream or download a song, you had to find and collect it. The curation of music was pivotal to one's individuality, especially at the impressionable age of 14. Or maybe it seemed that way because I was 14 in Seattle at the advent of grunge music in the early 1990s. Historians might suggest that grunge music took off with Nirvana in 1991. Other bands preceded it, but Nirvana brought grunge to the main stage. The 3-man scream-heavy troupe released its first single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, bursting onto the mainstream with its video of a grimy gymnasium with unruly cheerleaders and riotous students in bleachers. Its anarchic chords, frantic drumming, and incomprehensible lyrics flipped the conventions of the American high school. It was unlike anything we had seen since the punk rock antics of The Clash or the Sex Pistols with hints of 1970s dark metal. The album, Nevermind, released by Geffen Records, sold like Pinkberry, reaching number 1 within 4 months of its release. I also remember when Epic Records released Pearl Jam's 10. The band, formed by Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, had a sound equally wild and dark, but its guitars were a bit more melodic and its players looked a bit more wholesome. Epic Records, the same label that championed acts like the Culture Club and Cyndi Lauper in the 80s, optimistically pushed Pearl Jam's wine-red cassettes and long box compact discs onto merchandise kiosks, despite its slow initial sales. In the spring of '92, the album took off with its second single, Even Flow, featuring a Buzzbin video depicting Eddie Vedder diving off the walls of the Moore Theater in downtown 2nd Avenue. After that, 10 became a sensation, a pinnacle of the movement to be lauded for another 2 decades. What I remember most were the cassettes themselves. 10's was transparent plastic, clear with a hazy gray background. The typescript, in sans serif font, appeared in negative space. Now, this was 90s fashion. Cassettes from the 80s were almost always opaque white or cream with its typescript in small black font. I recall how revolutionary these clear gray ones had seemed, and how I'd prize my transparent tapes and disdain the white and cream ones as if the new design held a greater aesthetic. And when those transparent cassettes jammed, you could eyeball the mechanics of how it happened, and the skilled few of us could use a pencil to untangle the spools. I remember that rich chemical scent of cellophane and the click of the case when it first opened. The thin, firm case would stick sometimes along the edges, and if you weren't careful, the plastic would splinter down the sides. Its spools would rattle and the shell's weight varied based on the length of the recording. You could see the analog tape at the bottom between the guide roller and the pressure pad, clear at the lead before the magnetic material began. Often my shithead friends would neglect to spool forward before dubbing something and wonder why the beginning of a song got cut off. I remember storing my cassette collection in the headboard of my waterbed. I took pride in their condition, wiping off sticker residue with Goo Gone and restoring any cracked plastic by thieving unbroken cases from my sister's Broadway show tunes collection. I'd play them on my GE 11-2000 series stereo. You remember. Dual deck, vertical slot CD with graphic equalizer sliders. I'd play my music loudly, drumming with toy drumsticks on my pillows using my night lamp's shade as a symbol. I recall the way I felt important popping a new cassette into my AA battery-sucking Walkman and listening with evaluative ears. 10 was no exception. I bought the album without listening to a single song. Now this wasn't uncommon for me. Somehow, in my 13-year-old mind, I had deemed it suitable to go forth and scout new music. Then again, Pearl Jam and Nirvana were by no means grunge pioneers. Bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains had long preceded them. Mark Arm, lead singer of Mudhoney, had coined the term to a local magazine around 1981 when he described his music as pure grunge, pure noise, pure shit. By the time I turned 13, most of the recognizable Seattle acts had already recorded, long before the word grunge had reached the likes of Kurt Loder and Tabitha Soren on MTV News. Meanwhile, heavy metal VJs like Ricky Rockman paid little heed, despite Mike Judge opting to align Nirvana with his TV icons at the time, Beavis and Butthead. These guys are cool, says Butthead. If you go to Seattle, anybody you see is cool. We should go, dude. Grunge purists would have scoffed at that remark. Why? Because Beavis and Butthead loved metal. And Nirvana wasn't metal. Metal stood for something very different. The sensationalism of rock stardom and a wild disdain for societal norms, embodied in sex and drugs, needing nothing but a good time and fighting for the right to party. They may as well have been the Beastie Boys. Grunge wasn't about any of that. Grunge was about angst. When I was 13, I didn't know much about angst. I was just angry a lot of the time. As a middle school boy, I did things my suburban white friends did. You know, like sneak out at night with colored markers to vandalize garage doors, steal hubcaps and stop signs, or rip emblems off luxury cars to wear as neck chains. I remember Ben Buckley once stole a pack of condoms from Pay 'n Save for no reason. Nobody dared him to do it, he just did it. And they weren't made of latex, but slimy lambskin that looked and smelled and felt so weird, I wouldn't be surprised if a few of us got scared off from contraception well into our 20s. I remember 8th grade, sitting in a classroom doodling logos of popular bands and radio stations on textbook covers made from paper grocery bags. I remember feeling my self-worth measured by who had written what and at what length in my middle school yearbook. Whether so-and-so would go with me or whether what's-her-name would talk to me if I called her, and when I did, what I might say and why boys like Tyler Weigel never seemed to worry about stuff like that. All the while, popular girls with poofy bangs and jean jackets were drawn to him because he was athletic and played rec league football. They even liked the preacher's kid, we'll call him Matt F., who enjoyed speed metal and burning things in his basement while playing with his brother's 12-gauge. As an Asian minority, I learned to exercise my own charms. My skin color made me different from my all-white classmates. My house was on the south and poorer side of Seattle. Plus, I listened to lots of music other kids didn't own, that their parents wouldn't allow them to own, but I could obtain because my mom couldn't read English that well and didn't understand those black parental advisory stickers. Being a latchkey kid with cable television, I watched MTV like it was church. In 1991, I consumed a lot of rap and harmonizing R&B, along with whatever else was popular on the Top 20 video countdown. You remember, Moni Love's Work It Out, EMF's Unbelievable, Jesus Jones, Right Here, Right Now. The music was upbeat, rhythmic, and more or less innocent. Adolescent boys in backwards trousers yelling, "Jump, jump!" Or at worst, catchy choruses laden with innuendos. At school, I enlisted my expansive collection to DJ our middle school dances, even being snooty about which blank tapes to use while creating a mix. For the record, I used Maxell XL290 Chrome, or if warranted, the TDK MAXG90 Metal, which was solid black, heavier, and cost about 10% more. I'd turn my nose down at cheap brands like Memorex or Scotch. They all produced an inferior sound that even a handy head cleaner could not fix. I spent countless hours at the Westlake Central Music Land after school near the bus tunnels that ran north-south below 4th and 5th Avenue. My parents ran a restaurant on 3rd and Stewart, so I'd often go there instead of home until my mom could get off work. When I gathered the nerve, I'd purchase the profane political rap of Public Enemy or Ice Cube, because at least they were about something. The media would make a stink about Chuck D's controversial lyrics. I felt rebellious just to acquire it. Anything not played on popular stations like KPLZ or KUBE was more dangerous, and somehow cooler, because you had to be fluent in music just to know it. But when middle school came to an end, when the culture of button flies and hypercolors faded with memories of lunch milk, slap bracelets, and recess, the looming presence of music became indispensable to my social survival. That's because in high school in Seattle, circa 1992, who you listened to, what you knew of them, what live acts you had seen, and what record stores you shopped, all suddenly mattered. Beginning high school in the fall of 1992, I was still listening to MTV's Top 20, like Bobby Brown's third studio album, Bobby. Walking the school grounds, I would switch on my Walkman, go to class and interact with teachers, and then switch cassettes, maybe to that Me 5 Me single, Sad New Day. Some of you might remember the video with the black rapper in white paint with bugs creeping out of his scalp. Every morning at school, I wore my headphones down the halls instead of talking to or meeting other kids, maybe because I recalled how in middle school, music and urban stoicism were the means by which I set myself apart. That is, until someone discovered what I was listening to. It was probably a late September afternoon, after the football players left for practice and other kids got driven home. I would wait on the front steps of school while my sister finished theater practice. That was the first time I met them, and I'll name them by name because who knows what happened to these lads. They ain't coming to the reunions. Tim Reed, Ryan, Chris, and Todd. A crew of North Seattle boys with long hair, flannel, and dirty t-shirts with esoteric words scrawled in clashing colors. These boys loitered often on those front steps, and I quickly gathered they knew many of the other freshmen at our Catholic high school because they too had attended Catholic grade schools. They didn't notice me until they had to, but when they eventually spotted me wearing headphones, they didn't ask what track was playing. One day, Tim just snatched one of the earphones from my ear, leaned in, and took a listen. Me fight me? Dude, this sucks, he said. What else you got? He rummaged through my backpack, where I always kept at least a few of my tapes, and sifted through them accordingly. Poison? Crap. Cypress Hill? Crap. Tara Kemp? Dude, you listen to Tara Kemp? It was only when he encountered Nirvana's album, not Nevermind with the pool baby on the cover, but their first release, Bleach, that I garnered a tone of respect. You have Bleach? Awesome! Then Tim removed both of my headphones, put them over his ears, popped in my tape and began screaming along to the garbled lyrics of Nirvana's Negative Creep. I observed the confused faces of passersby as he began to yell.
This is out of our reach, this is out of our reach, this is out of our reach, and it's slow. This is getting to be, this is getting to be, this is getting to be the slow. I'm a negative creep, I'm a negative creep, I'm a negative creep, and I'm so. I'm a negative creep.
And that was pretty much the song, accompanied by Nirvana's signature guitar distortion, thrumming bass, and rapid snare-heavy percussions reminiscent of gunfire. Its vocals were atonal, it had little semblance of a melody, and squeals of speaker feedback preceded and concluded each track on the recording. Teachers and preppy kids in polo shirts passed us by, undoubtedly finding us weird, but I guess that was sort of the appeal. It matched Tim Reed and his scruffy cohorts to a T. Now, I didn't find any of this a big deal, not minding whether this dusty blonde flannel shirt wearing kid approved of my music. That is until I discovered that Tim Reed had gone to middle school with a lot of other boys in my freshman class. Boys like Dan Reed, George Stamos, Ty Rogers, and Mark Matson. Popular boys who lifted weights and rode skateboards, who talked about ski vacations, wore cologne and arrived in school in Toyota 4Runners. Boys who already had dates to the homecoming dance. popular boys who knew popular girls, and then it mattered, because I was still a nobody floating in a sea of Catholic kids who already knew one another. I was a nobody who knew no one, who understood very little about getting in with my high school classmates. Except that they liked grunge. They liked it a lot. More than I liked rap. So much so they delighted when you asked what they were listening to because they could smirk and say, "It's an underground band, you never heard of it." It didn't matter how good the music actually was. An album carried more weight the more obscure, more off-label, or more bootleg it was. In time, I perused their collections of Canadian import CDs and live recording CDs and homemade demo tapes from local bands complete with hand-drawn liner notes. Bands with names like Collins Mix, or Seditionaries, or Sad Happy, with innovatively designed and home photocopied cassette sleeve covers. One day Tim dubbed me a copy of Nirvana's Live Tits album, an import from Japan, which first featured the live version of the song Rape Me, and how, though it sounded as if the audio was done by someone holding up a tape recorder in the audience, I was ecstatic to own Nirvana music that nobody else possessed. This infatuation intensified. Come Monday morning, I would hear kids talk at the lockers about how someone's older brother had snuck them into local live music bar Rock Candy, maybe to see Mark Lanigan of the Screaming Trees play an acoustic gig. "Lanigan used to be good, but then his voice changed," Chris instructed. Another week, somebody arrived with their arm in a sling. I'd ask why, and that someone explained they'd broken a bone in the mosh pit watching Hammerbox perform at the Phoenix in Pioneer Square. I hadn't yet heard of Hammerbox, but I had begun to devotedly follow KNDD 107.7 and the newest Buzzbin videos on MTV. Bands like Helmet, Temple of the Dog, and Stone Temple Pilots. My mom and sister could barely keep up with the band names of the cassettes I inserted into the car stereo. "It all sounds the same," they complained. And while I had my favorites, I admit, it all sorta did. By mid-semester, grunge had its hooks in me. I matured in my knowledge of the culture, going as far as purchasing new clothes and growing out my hair. I'd load my backpack each morning with a different album in case someone asked what I was listening to. Everyone in school already carried a Walkman or Discman, so I'd acquire material I suspected other people didn't have, like that split single of The Jesus Lizard and Nirvana I got at Camelot Music in South Center Mall. Never would I be caught with a common Pearl Jam or corporate rock album, and never would I admit to shopping at Musicland or the Warehouse. Instead, I would shop at Cellophane Square in the U District, or the Orpheum on Broadway and Roy, amassing albums, many of them from the Seattle-based sub-pop label like Seaweed's Week or Fluid's Glue/Roadmouth, so that when somebody did tap my shoulder, I'd show them an album they hadn't heard or at least deemed cool. Then maybe they'd want to borrow it from me. In exchange, I'd borrow something from them, maybe Gas Huffers, Janitors of Tomorrow, and thereby engage in a relationship. I wouldn't go as far as saying friendship, but in 9th grade, in some ways having someone know your name is as good as it gets. And now and then I'd get trapped in the ruse. You know, of being a poser. After all, I didn't have any money. I'd never attended a concert. I didn't really know this music. I mean, not the way true grunge aficionados did. I didn't get my flannel shirt handed down from my lumberjack father. I'd purchased it at Hot Topic. One day it happened at the lunch table. You all remember. School lunch seating was the ultimate measure of popularity, right? Our cafeteria's circular tables fit only 6 to 8 students at a time. And the Grunge Kids sat at one table, leaving the posers, or the losers, at the fringes, or worse, an adjacent table. That day, I was lucky enough to snag a chair at the main table when someone began talking about the band Sonic Youth. Foolishly, I admitted I didn't know their song 100%. Dan Reed promptly called me out. "You call yourself a rocker and you don't even know 100%? Everyone laughed. Chris Cannell snickered about how I listened to 9 Inch Nails. While I ate silently, I considered how, even though 9 Inch Nails appeared in the alternative rock section at mall record stores, it wasn't grunge. Even if Trent Reznor demonstrated more musical innovation than grunge bands like the Sweaty Nipples, whose song Touch My Cum is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, it didn't matter. It wasn't grunge, and somehow that made a difference. And it hurt. Maybe because I didn't know who I was anymore. I'd established an identity in middle school, but now in high school I suddenly had none. Maybe young adolescence once made sense, but teenage life didn't. Maybe my parents didn't understand I no longer felt like a child. and wouldn't respond to their efforts to connect by taking me to movies, going for drives, or making my favorite pizza. That I yearned to be my own person, but didn't know how to get there. How I prided myself in the little social rank I could attain, still desperately in envy of those above me, but openly mocking those beneath me, especially when they didn't have the right music. And most of all, how social acceptance surpassed the emotional needs my family once supplied, and how it sucked being different from everyone almost as much as it sucked being exactly the same, living an ordinary, comfortable, boring middle-class life. It made me want to scream, and possibly destroy something. Hey, maybe it was evolutionary, this desire for acceptance by revering an ideological movement. Maybe it was instinctual behavior. We want to be part of a tribe, right? Tribes are how individuals secure protection. And we yearn to be recognized in tribes because that's how we get sustenance and opportunities to mate. And we yearn to be part of a movement because we all need a battle to fight. War and glory, at least for men, are the manner by which humans find significance. Let's remember this was 1992. Communism had fallen and America had beaten Saddam's army in 100 hours. We suddenly found ourselves with no battle to fight. In its place, we had angst. Angst was about the turmoil of existing, being misunderstood in a meaningless world. Grunge rock was the music of the suburban teenage boy, fueled by high testosterone with no physical need to hunt for food or fend off aggressors. Like a dog cooped up in a cage all day, we needed something to destroy. Grunge music was loud, warped, grainy, and distorted. Its lyrics had scant meaning and its composition bore little resemblance to conventional notes and measures. And fittingly, after shows, many performers took their instruments and bashed them to pieces. So, about starting fires. One day at the end of lunch period, I was with a group of kids near the front steps of school. It was a good mix of us. The 11:30 a.m. to 12:15 block was a typical freshman lunch, with clusters of preppy kids, Nike-wearing jocks, and computer dorks congregating around the foyer waiting for the bell to ring. One of the jocks, Dylan, found a purple bottle of Aussie hair gel and a pack of matches in the bushes. Another kid convinced him to dump the gel into the concave top of the concrete garbage receptacle. You know, the part that used to hold sand for cigarette butts, remember? Dylan, who moments ago had so eagerly dumped the gel, shied away from the matches. Someone goaded him on. "Dude, light it." But Dylan refused. "Give it to me," I said, swiping the matches. I distinctly recall hearing another kid's voice behind me. "Russ Knocker, you better do it. You better not chicken out." Little did he know, I didn't require peer pressure. I already possessed enough anger inside to want to burn the world down. I lit the match, tossed it into the gel, setting it ablaze. Everybody ran. Weirdly enough, I ran too, even though I knew I had a decent chance of getting caught. Our Catholic school was small enough that witnesses could identify a malefactor through a process of elimination, especially when it came to a fat Asian kid like me. Vice Principal Brian Gummersall made a stern midday announcement via the loudspeaker, requesting tips on apprehending the vandal responsible for the garbage can fire. Between classes in the locker hallways, kids were talking about it. I overheard the popular Mark Matson describe how his history teacher, Mrs. Tullis, said that whoever lit the fire was just starving for attention. To be honest, that was probably one of 3 times in high school I recall getting so much attention. Yet I remember thinking how I lit the fire only after calculating the receptacle, made of stone concrete, possessed little capacity to spread its flames, that it wouldn't cause any real damage, and that it was worth doing what f***ing Dylan didn't have the nerve to do. Being a high school nobody, I had little to lose. So here's how it all unfolded. Mr. Gummersall made a second plea via the loudspeaker, insisting the vandal turn himself in by end of day, lest more severe repercussions would ensue. So I decide, I'm not going to live my life on the lam. I'm just going to go in and surrender. What's the worst they could do to me? As I walk up to the principal's office, I see there, seated in the office chairs, none other than Tim, Ryan, Chris, and Todd, predictably clad in their flannel shirts, stained pants, and army boots. We glanced at each other. Nobody said a word. Following a brief interrogation, the submissive Asian part of me kicked in. I decided I needed to take the high road, so I exonerated those grunge boys. I mean, they weren't even on the foyer when it happened. Like a nice young man playing to the judge that he just doesn't know any better, I took responsibility and said those boys should go free, and Mr. Gummersall let them go. After all, they weren't even there. Only later did it dawn on me that they hadn't come up to the office to turn themselves in. No, those boys had been rounded up. The school administration had suspected something and brought in the Grunge Kids for questioning. Maybe because they fit the mold of the antisocial, misanthropic, attention-craving teenager the Catholic school faculty presumed would do such a thing. Had I realized this, I wouldn't have let them off the hook so easily. Nah, I would have let them sweat. After all, they were just kids like me. But Tim Reed and his scruffy North Seattle cronies never displayed anything but egotism and cruelty to me. Music and grunge were the weapons they used to gain popularity and belittle their lessers. And like most suburban teens, they were all noise and full of shit. I doubt any of them would have had the stones to light that fire. So now it's 3 decades later. I find myself in middle age and a father of 2 young boys. Now, as an oldish man, whenever I hear grunge music, I think of us lost teenagers in Seattle during the 1990s. And I'm reminded of Noel Gallagher of the post-alternative 90s band Oasis. Being interviewed, he describes himself as a fan of Nirvana. That is, until hearing their song, I Hate Myself and I Want to Die. Well, I'm not having that, Gallagher said. As much as I like Cobain and all that, I can't have people like that coming over here on smack saying they hate themselves and they want to die. That's rubbish. I thought, easy for Noel Gallagher to say. He looks like a rock star. And sure, maybe Gallagher didn't always appear like he did on the Rolling Stone cover. But I wonder if he shared that same sense of dreary meaninglessness we did in our youth in rainy Seattle during the 1990s. Or maybe he did. He grew up in Manchester, England, after all. That place sucks. I will say 2 more things about the time I lit the school on fire. First, the Grunge Kids, who remained Grunge Kids all throughout high school. They never associated with me again. As we got higher up in our years at school, I'd see them around the halls. They always held vacant stares, like they were on something. Second, for reasons I still don't know, I never had to do any detention time, nor did I hear another word from the vice principal for lighting that fire. And I hate to admit, that little incident wasn't even the last high school garbage can fire I got myself involved in before graduating in 1996.